Picture this. Late one night, a breaking news alert flashes. Several major nations announce they will no longer trade in US dollars. In an instant, markets plunge. Oil, gold, and commodities are suddenly priced in a new currency basket. Americans wake up to a dollar that buys far less than it did yesterday. Panic spreads from Wall Street to Main Street. This scenario sounds like economic doomsday. But what if it really happened? What if the US dollar lost its status as the world's reserve currency?
The dollar's exorbitant privilege.
For over 75 years, the US dollar has been the backbone of global finance. Since World War II, it served as the primary reserve currency, underpinning trade, stability, and economic power. Today, nearly 58% of global reserves are held in dollars, and almost 90% of forex transactions involve it. Oil, commodities, and major deals are priced in dollars, a status that gives the US what the French called an exorbitant privilege, the ability to borrow cheaply and print freely, sustained by global trust. But no currency stays king forever. In the 19th and early 20th century, it was the British pound that ruled. That changed after World War II, when a weakened Britain gave way to an ascendant America. By mid-century, the dollar had replaced the pound, and the US built a new financial order. Bretton Woods, the IMF, and the World Bank all anchored in its currency.
Echoes of history, the fall of the pound.
After World War II, the British Empire faded, and the pound steadily lost its status as the world's reserve currency. Devalued multiple times, most notably in 1949, it gradually gave way to the US dollar, yet the UK adapted. The decline was slow, not sudden, a lesson that a fall from dominance may be painful, but survivable. If the dollar slips, it likely won't be an instant collapse, but a drawn-out transition, one that, like Britain, could cost the US austerity, global influence, and financial ease.
Mounting pressure. The Triffin trap.
America's share of global GDP has dropped from nearly 40% after WAI to around 24% today, yet it continues running massive deficits to meet global demand for dollars. This is the Triffin dilemma. The reserve currency issuer must overspend to supply liquidity, but that very overspending erodes long-term trust. With US debt now surpassing $30 trillion and political gridlock in Washington worsening, the world is asking, can the US still lead or even manage its own finances?
The gathering storm.
Doubts are growing. A 2024 global survey found 2/3 of finance professionals expect the dollar to lose reserve status within 5 to 15 years. Most don't see a single replacement, but a multipolar system where financial power is shared. Inflation and aggressive monetary policy, from the 2008 crash to the pandemic, have only added to concerns. As Ray Dalio warns, money as we know it is in jeopardy. Many central banks are now diversifying into euros, yen, gold, and yuan.
Geopolitical fallout.
The US has also weaponized the dollar, cutting off adversaries from the global financial system. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, over $300 billion, 0 cents, in reserves were frozen. The message was clear: step out of line and your dollars can disappear. For countries like China, Saudi Arabia, or Brazil, this has been a wake-up call, prompting global efforts to de-dollarize and reduce exposure. As Dalio notes, those sanctions increase the perceived risk of holding dollar assets. When trust fades, the system starts to shake.
Rising rivals. UN, BRICS, and beyond.
China is leading the shift, promoting the yuan in trade, launching a digital yuan, building alternative payment systems like SIPs, and cutting dollar use in deals with partners like Brazil and Russia. The BRICS nations are also moving away from the dollar, favoring local currency trade over the once floated idea of a shared reserve currency. India buying oil in rupees or China sourcing minerals in yuan reflects a growing intent to bypass the dollar, one deal at a time. Even US allies are hedging. The euro, which holds about 20% of global reserves, gained appeal after Europe saw how US sanctions constrained their autonomy. Attempts to trade with Iran outside the dollar system fell short. But the desire to diversify remains. All of this reflects a multipolar mindset, a world rebalancing away from dollar dominance. As one economist put it, you can't replace something with nothing, and former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers famously quipped, "Europe is a museum, Japan a nursing home, and China a jail." Still, digital currencies, blockchain, and new reserve baskets, like an upgraded IMF SDR, or even a global crypto, are gaining traction. Speculative or not, the message is clear: the world is no longer content with a 100% dollar-centric system, and the alternatives are already in motion.
What if the dollar falls? Global ripple effects.
If the US dollar lost its reserve status, the consequences would be far-reaching. From economic turbulence to geopolitical shifts. In the US, life would change. The government could no longer finance deficits with ease. If demand for US treasuries drops, interest rates would spike, raising the cost of mortgages, loans, and credit. To cover expenses, Washington might print more money, fueling inflation. Imports would become more expensive. Oil, if priced in other currencies, could strain Americans further through rising fuel costs. A weaker dollar means your money buys less. From groceries to global travel, the standard of living would likely fall. Some industries might benefit, US exports would become cheaper abroad, but that's little comfort in the face of a broader credit crunch or inflation surge. Without reserve status, America's ability to borrow without consequence disappears. Pressure to raise taxes or slash spending would grow. Even a debt default, once unthinkable, could become a real risk. As Nobel economist Paul Krugman warned, the greatest threat to the dollar is political dysfunction. Geopolitically, US leverage would decline. Sanctions would lose their sting if other countries can trade without the dollar. Military and crisis response budgets would tighten, and the end of the American century could become more than symbolic. Globally, the fallout would be complex. Without a clear successor, we could see a fragmented system, currency blocks based on the yuan, euro, or dollar. Trade would become more cumbersome, with greater currency risk. Financial markets could turn more volatile. Yet some argue this shift wouldn't be catastrophic. After all, the world survived the fall of the pound. A multipolar system might limit any one nation's power to inflate global money or export domestic crises. Still, the transition would be risky. The financial system today is like a Jenga tower built on dollars. Pull that piece too fast and the whole thing could wobble or crash. A disorderly shift might spark bank failures or hyperinflation in vulnerable nations. But if the transition is slow and coordinated, the world might adapt, spreading financial power more evenly.
A new financial era.
So what happens if the dollar falls? In many ways, the story has already begun. Rising debt, global pushback, and digital alternatives all point to shifting foundations. Like the pound before it, the dollar's dominance may not end in a bang, but in a slow fade. Will it take 5 years? 10? More? No one knows. But one thing is clear: no currency reigns forever. If the dollar loses its throne, the US will face a reckoning, with less privilege, more discipline, and a reshaped global role. Some will call it decline. Others, a necessary rebalancing. Either way, the dance of conflict and context continues. The decisions made in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, and beyond will shape the next financial era. Are we ready for that moment? It's a question worth asking now, before the music stops and a new dance begins in global finance.